Hey folks, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to talk about lifecycle management for S3. It's pretty straightforward and very possibly a review, but it's certainly something that you can expect to see on the DevOps Pro certification. Scenarios where you need to store data securely and durably, and oftentimes timeframes will be added in the scenario, such as a phrase like the data can be archived after 60 days. And that's the kind of thing you want to pick up on and start thinking about Glacier. So look for those clues. And while there are other storage options in AWS, S3 should always be on the forefront of your thoughts. So let's go in the DevOps doctrine to lifecycle management. Now it's important to note up front that the pricing model for S3. So Amazon charges depending on the amount of data being stored, how many requests are performed, and how much data we transfer out. Now the nice thing about S3 is we can store almost an infinite number of objects. We're not going to run out of room in S3. But of course we have to have an eye on cost. So let's talk about our storage classes. Our first is standard storage. And some of the pros of standard storage is probably heard of the 11 nines of durability. It's incredibly highly durable. It's also highly available. Now, some of the cons are it's not the cheapest. And that's okay if our requirements meet certain criteria. We can move our data off to cheaper storage, such as S3 infrequent access and Glacier. Now I'm showing three storage classes: standard, infrequent access, and Glacier. Amazon recently removed S3 reduced redundancy storage and also added S3 one zone infrequent access. Now with one zone infrequent access, it's kind of self-explanatory. Unlike other Amazon storage classes, which store data in a minimum of 3 availability zones, one zone stores data in a single AZ. Now, because of this, it is cheaper, but of course, the availability and resilience is less. But I'm going to focus on the three main storage classes because it's unlikely that these changes will be reflected on the DevOps Pro exam at the time of this recording. All right, so let's talk about the S3 infrequent access. So again, it has the 11 nines durability, and as the name implies, it's for data that is accessed less frequently. And another pro is the lower request costs. It's great for data that needs to be readily available but not frequently accessed. Now, S3 infrequent access is a great option for disaster recovery. While it does have lower availability when thinking about DR, you just need it available to perform your recovery until you work on getting back to your baseline environment. And finally, we have Amazon Glacier, used for rarely accessed data. So the pros are low storage cost per gigabyte, and it's highly durable. Cons are very slow data retrieval. We're talking like 4 to 6 hours. That may be another phrase in your scenarios to look for. And the wording of your scenario will either point to Glacier or eliminate it. But if you need long-term storage and you're okay with the slow data retrieval, Glacier is your option. Now, having said that, another con is that the requests are expensive. But generally, you're storing this type of data for certain situations. An example would be for an audit. So if you go through an audit once a year or once every 2 years, it's certainly worth it. All right, so how do we manage all of this? Well, we can manage an object's lifecycle by using lifecycle configurations, which tell S3 how to manage objects during their lifecycle. I'm going to go over to S3 and I will create a bucket. All right, and I need it to be all lowercase. Click Next. And just out of habit, I usually turn on versioning. Now remember, with versioning, you're storing extra copies, and that storage translates into more cost. Let's click Next, Next, and create bucket. All right, now let's go to our bucket, and we go to Management, And let's configure Lifecycle for this bucket. Next. And let's do current and previous versions. And now we have to add a transition to standard IA after 30 days. And likewise for previous versions. So let's click next. And we could configure the expiration of our data objects. But let's just click next and save. All right, and let's set up one more, and we'll set one up for Glacier. Click next, current version and previous versions, and then we just add a transition to Glacier after 90 days. And let's click next. We won't worry about expiration. All right, and that's pretty much how you configure Object Lifecycle Management for your S3 buckets. So our lifecycle actions are transition actions, which is what we configured, define when to move objects to another storage class, and expiration actions, which we saw but didn't configure, and they specify when an object expires and should be deleted. All right, so just a couple lifecycle management limitations. Objects must be stored at least 30 days before they can transition to S3IA. And another thing is you cannot transition backwards. In other words, you can't go from S3IA back to S3, or you can't go from Glacier back to any other class. Now, what you could do is extract that data. Let's say you could extract data from Glacier and restore it in S3, but there's no lifecycle management policy to transition it back automatically. So again, when thinking about lifecycle management, just always be looking for some of your keywords. Long-term storage, that's certainly pointing to Glacier, and especially if you don't need to retrieve the data immediately or quickly. Highly durable and highly available. Should be thinking S3. So that's an overview of S3 Object Lifecycle Management. Go ahead and mark this lesson complete, and let's move on to the next.